I was 35 when I first met her, and though I didn't know it then, that single evening would unravel the life I thought I'd built so carefully. Her name was Emily, and she had a way of filling a room without even trying, like a sudden shift in the weather you feel before you understand it's happening. It was at a friend's small gathering in the city, nothing remarkable. A few bottles of wine, the clinking of glasses, half a dozen people circling through conversations that rose and fell with laughter. I wasn't looking for anything that night. I was tired from work, my heart long since trained into cautious solitude after years of relationships that either burned too brightly or fizzled before they ever had a chance. And then she walked in. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads because of loud colors or striking makeup. She wore something simple, a dark dress that fell around her knees, hair pulled back loosely, a few curls slipping down her cheek. But there was something in the way she carried herself, quiet but unyielding, that made me pause mid-sentence and forget whatever joke I was telling. We talked near the window, where the night air drifted in through the cracked pane. She told me about her love for painting, how she'd once dreamed of showing her work in galleries but settled for teaching kids instead. I told her about my job, about the endless pressure of deadlines, though I softened the edges of the truth. For some reason with her, I wanted to appear lighter, freer than I really was. Hours slipped away unnoticed. The others faded, and it felt as though the room was only ours. When I finally left that night, her number was saved in my phone, her laughter still lingering in my ears. Looking back now, I should have known. I should have seen how quickly the ground beneath me was shifting, how easily a single smile could pry open doors I thought I'd locked long ago. But hindsight is cruel that way. It paints red flags in bold colors, flags you swore were invisible at the time. Our relationship unfolded fast, like fire catching on dry wood. Dinners turned into weekends away, whispered confessions into shared keys. For the first time in years, I let someone in and it felt intoxicating. She had this way of making me believe I was more than I saw in myself. With Emily, I wasn't just a man going through the motions. I was alive again. But even in those early days, there were shadows I ignored. She avoided questions about her past, dodged when I asked about old relationships, about her family. Once, when I pressed too much, she laughed it off and said, "Some doors are better left closed." I let it go, mistaking mystery for depth, secrecy for charm. And then came the first lie. It was small, almost nothing. She told me she was working late one Friday, but when I called her office, they said she had left hours before. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe she had gone out with friends and didn't want me to feel neglected. But something inside me tightened, a coil I couldn't shake. From then on, I started noticing the gaps, the late-night messages she didn't explain, the sudden changes in her tone when I walked into the room, the way she sometimes looked at me like she was already somewhere else. Still, I clung to her. I told myself every couple has cracks, that trust is a muscle built over time. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I didn't want to lose her. One evening, months into us, I came home early. Her bag was on the couch, her phone buzzing on the table. I wouldn't have looked, at least that's what I tell myself. But the screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, a message that read, "I miss you, tonight." I froze. My chest went hollow. For long seconds I couldn't breathe. When she emerged from the shower minutes later, humming softly, wrapped in nothing but a towel, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I buried it deep, convincing myself there must be an explanation. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and from that moment on, every laugh, every kiss, every promise she made tasted like ash. And yet I stayed. Because sometimes love isn't a choice, but a trap you build with your own hands. I kept the message to myself, though it burned in my pocket every time I thought of it. The rational part of me screamed to confront her, to demand answers, but another part, cowardly, fragile, whispered that asking might destroy everything. And so I smiled when she smiled, laughed when she laughed, and played the role of the man who didn't notice the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Weeks passed and the cracks widened. She grew more distant, disappearing on weekends with excuses that didn't hold together, avoiding my gaze when I asked simple questions. Yet in between, she would still have moments of tenderness, curling into me at night, tracing circles on my arm, whispering words that made me believe, if only for a heartbeat, that she loved me. The truth, I would learn, is never as clean as love or betrayal. It's something messier, sharper, and far harder to escape. One night while she was in the shower, her phone lit up again, the same name. This time a picture flashed across the screen, a blurry photo of her smiling in a place I'd never seen. The caption, "Wish you were here." My hands shook as I stared at it, my pulse racing like I'd been caught doing something forbidden. When she stepped out moments later, wrapped in steam, I forced myself to look away. But the seed had grown roots, and denial was no longer enough. I began to notice details I'd ignored before. The scent of cologne on her clothes, not mine. The careful way she hid receipts in her purse. The half-finished stories she told about where she had been. I kept a journal, writing down every inconsistency, as though gathering evidence for a trial I was too afraid to begin. And then came the night that broke me. She said she was going to see a friend who was struggling, someone from her art classes. I nodded, kissed her forehead, and wished her well. But something in her eyes that evening, it wasn't compassion, it was guilt. A thick, suffocating guilt she tried to bury under her practiced smile. After she left, I waited. An hour, two. Then, against every ounce of pride I had left, I followed. Her car was easy to spot, parked outside a quiet little restaurant across town. Through the glass windows, I saw her at a corner table, leaning forward with her hand on another man. He was older, maybe 40, with a sharp suit and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. They laughed together, heads close, as though they were the only two people in the world. I stood there, hidden in the dark, watching my life collapse from the outside in. Every smile she had given me, every promise, every whispered "I love you." They all cracked apart in that moment, fragile lies splintering under the weight of reality. I didn't storm inside. I didn't demand answers. I turned, walked back to my car, and sat there in the silence, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She came home late that night, her hair smelling faintly of smoke and perfume. She kissed me softly before slipping into bed as though nothing had happened. I lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, feeling like an intruder in my own life. The next morning I almost told her. I almost held up the mirror and forced her to see what she was doing. But when I opened my mouth, the words withered. Instead, I asked her if she wanted coffee. And in that silence, I understood something about myself that I'd never wanted to admit. I was terrified of losing her more than I was terrified of the truth. The days that followed blurred together. I played the role of the faithful partner, but inside I was unraveling. Every touch of hers felt like poison, every smile a blade against my chest. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind, if perhaps I had invented the betrayal, twisted shadows into monsters because I was afraid of the dark. But then came the twist I hadn't expected. One evening, while she was out with friends, I couldn't bear the silence of the apartment. I wandered into her studio, a room she rarely let me enter, filled with canvases draped in cloth. I pulled one cover away, expecting color and brushstrokes. Instead, I found a painting that made my stomach lurch. It was of me. Or rather of us, her and me locked in an embrace. But the details were wrong. Her face was clear, painted with loving precision, while mine was blurred, fading into the background as though I were already vanishing. On the back of the canvas, scrawled in quick strokes of paint, were the words, "Temporary." My knees nearly buckled beneath me. I stared at it for a long time, unable to move, unable to breathe. Temporary. That was what I had been all along. Not a partner, not a lover, just a placeholder. I covered the painting again before she came home. hiding my discovery like a shameful secret. But inside, I knew the clock had started ticking, and sooner or later the truth would spill into the light. It's strange how, once you glimpse the truth, you begin to see it everywhere. After finding that painting, I could no longer pretend. Every word she spoke carried the weight of double meanings. Every look she gave me seemed tinged with pity, and every silence between us stretched long and sharp, filled with things she would never say. I wanted to confront her, to drag everything out into the open, but I couldn't. Not yet. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, but the truth is I was afraid. Afraid of what she might say, and more afraid of how I would survive once the words were spoken. So I watched her quietly, closely. She began to leave earlier in the mornings, dressed carefully as though she were performing for someone else. She came home late, sometimes with excuses, sometimes with none at all. And when she did climb into bed beside me, her warmth felt foreign, like sharing a blanket with a stranger. But the worst part wasn't her distance, it was her kindness. She still asked about my day, still cooked my favorite meals, still brushed her lips against mine in passing. That sweetness made the betrayal cut deeper. If she had been cruel, if she had been cold, I could have hated her. Instead, I was drowning in a tide of love that no longer belonged to me. One night, unable to endure it any longer, I followed her again. This time she didn't go to a restaurant. She drove out of the city, along winding roads that led to a small, secluded house tucked away near the woods. I parked far enough back not to be seen and watched as she stepped out of her car. The man from the restaurant was there, waiting. His face lit up when he saw her, and she ran into his arms like a scene from a film I was never cast in. They kissed, long and tender, and then disappeared inside together. I sat there for hours, watching the lights glow in the windows, the silhouettes moving inside. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The laughter, the intimacy, the shared life, it was all visible in their shadows. She belonged there with him, not with me. When she finally returned home that night, she slipped into bed without a word. I lay still, feigning sleep, but inside I was hollow. Something had broken in me out there in the dark, something that could never be mended. The next morning I thought about leaving. I imagined packing a bag, walking out the door, and never looking back. But then I saw her in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she poured coffee. For a moment she looked exactly as she had when we first met, bright, alive, untouchable. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk away from the ghost of the woman I had fallen in love with. So I stayed. But I began to plan, not for revenge, not yet, but for survival. I started keeping copies of the things I found, receipts, messages, photographs. I told myself it was evidence, though I didn't know who I would show it to. Maybe just myself, when the day finally came that I couldn't deny it anymore. The breaking point arrived sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday afternoon, bright and deceptively calm. She said she was going to the studio to finish some paintings. I nodded, pretending not to know that her brushes hadn't been touched in weeks. When she left, I waited 15 minutes, then drove toward the house by the woods. This time I didn't stay in the car. I walked up the path, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. Through the window, I saw them together again, laughing, holding each other as if they were building a life that excluded me entirely. Something inside me snapped. I didn't barge in or scream. I simply turned away, walked back to my car, and drove aimlessly until the sun began to set. I couldn't go home. I couldn't face her. Instead, I pulled over near the river and sat there, staring at the water, asking myself who I had become. When I finally did return, hours later, she was already home. She looked at me with a smile that almost seemed real and asked how my day had been. I wanted to tell her I had seen everything, that the charade was over, but the words stuck in my throat. I just nodded and said it was fine. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at her face in the dim light and realized something terrible. I still loved her. Even knowing everything, even after watching her give her heart to someone else, I still loved her with a desperation that made me sick. And love like that, it's not a gift, it's a curse. I knew then that something had to change. I couldn't live like this, torn between truth and lies, drowning in a love that was killing me. But what I didn't know was that the change was already coming, faster and darker than I could have imagined. Because the next secret I uncovered didn't just break my heart, it nearly destroyed my life. The secret revealed itself in the most ordinary way. A letter, tucked carelessly in the stack of mail on the kitchen counter, half hidden beneath a grocery flyer. I almost didn't notice it. The envelope bore no return address, but my name wasn't on it either. It was hers. I should have left it alone, but suspicion makes a man reckless, and love twisted with betrayal makes him dangerous. My hands shook as I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the contents. Inside was a medical bill. At first I barely understood it, jargon, numbers, procedures. But then my eyes snagged on the name. The patient wasn't her. It was a child, a boy, 6 years old. And the father listed on the records was the man from the house in the woods. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the counter, the paper rattling in my hands as the truth settled over me like ice. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just stolen kisses and secret meetings. She had another life, a family, a son. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at that single sheet of paper, my mind unraveling. Memories rewound in my head, the times she disappeared for whole weekends, the mysterious trips she couldn't explain, the tenderness in her voice when she said she was tired. She hadn't been painting. She hadn't been working late. She'd been raising a child with another man. When she came home that evening, I was still sitting at the table, the bill spread out in front of me. She froze the instant she saw it. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just looked at her, waiting. Her eyes filled with tears before she even spoke. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered. "I tried so many times, but I didn't know how." Her words felt like knives. I asked her the only question that mattered: why? She sank into the chair across from me, her hands trembling. "Before I met you, there was him. We were never married, but we had a child. Things fell apart. He left. I thought it was over. Then I met you, and for the first time I felt like I could breathe again. I wanted to leave that life behind to start fresh. But when he came back, everything changed. He wanted to be in his son's life. And she choked on the words, I couldn't shut them out. Her confession felt like both a wound and a cruel mercy. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she had built a life with me on lies. But all I could do was sit there, silent, because the one thing I couldn't deny was that I still loved her. The days that followed were unbearable. Every time she left, I wondered if she was going to her son, to him. I couldn't ask her not to. I wasn't heartless. But I couldn't endure being the shadow of her double life either. One evening, driven by an impulse I couldn't contain, I went back to that house. I parked far enough away to stay hidden and watched through the trees. I saw her in the yard, kneeling beside a boy with dark hair and bright eyes. She was laughing, brushing dirt from his knees, her face glowing with a joy I hadn't seen in years. And in that moment I realized the cruelest part of all. She wasn't faking it. That happiness was real. The love she had for that child was real. And the man standing beside her, smiling proudly, was part of it in a way I never could be. I left before she saw me, drove aimlessly again, heart splitting in two until the city lights blurred in my vision. I wanted to confront her, to demand she choose, but deep down I already knew the answer. She didn't need to pick between us. She already had. The nights grew colder between us. She tried in her way, small touches, soft words, but her mind was always elsewhere. I could feel it. Our bed was crowded, haunted by people who weren't there. And then, one night, she said the words I had been dreading. "I can't keep living like this. You deserve better than half of me." I laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "And what do you deserve?" She looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "I deserve to be a mother to my son. I can't let him grow up in the shadows of my lies." There was nothing to argue with, nothing to fight for. She had already chosen. She moved out a week later. No screaming, no broken dishes, no final dramatic fight. Just boxes carried quietly to her car, one after another, while I sat on the couch pretending not to watch. When the door finally closed behind her, the silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. But even then, I couldn't stop loving her. Even when she was gone, even when the house felt like a grave, my heart refused to let her go. And that, I think, was the most unbearable betrayal of all, not hers but mine. My own heart choosing her, no matter the cost. The weeks after she left blurred together, like days half-lived in a fog. I kept waking in the middle of the night, expecting to find her beside me, only to discover the hollow curve of an empty bed. The quiet was suffocating. No clatter of her coffee mug in the morning, no hum of her voice drifting through the rooms. Just silence, thick and endless, pressing down on me until I thought it might crush me entirely. At first I told myself it was temporary, that she'd come back, that maybe once the dust settled, once she realized what we had, what we could still have, she would walk through that door again. I lived on that hope, fragile as glass, carrying it around like a shield against the truth. But reality has a way of breaking through. I ran into her once, weeks later, at a grocery store. She was with the boy. He clung to her hand, chattering about cereal brands, his laughter spilling out like sunlight. She looked radiant, more alive than I'd ever seen her. When her eyes met mine across the aisle, the smile faltered. For a moment I thought she'd say something, but she only gave me a small nod, polite and aching, before guiding her son away. I stood there, holding a basket of food I no longer wanted, realizing that I had become a stranger in her life. The man who once knew every detail of her dreams now meant nothing more than a ghost of her past. Nights became harder. I kept thinking about all the lies she told me, not with anger anymore, but with a terrible kind of longing. I remembered the way she laughed when she was tired, the way her hair smelled like rain when she came in from outside, the way her hands always found mine in the dark. I kept turning those memories over like stones, as if somewhere beneath them I might find an explanation that made the betrayal easier to bear. One evening, unable to stand the emptiness of the house, I drove out to the river where we used to walk together. The night air was cool, and the water glistened under the pale glow of the street lamps. I sat there for hours, listening to the current, thinking about the first time she had kissed me, and the last time she had said she loved me. Both moments felt unreal now, like scenes from someone else's life. That's when I realized something. The betrayal wasn't a single wound. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, spread out across time, reopening every time I remembered her smile, every time I thought of what might have been. Betrayal doesn't just end when the person leaves, it lingers, gnawing at the edges of your heart long after they're gone. I don't know if she thinks of me. Maybe when she tucks her son into bed, there's a flicker of regret in her mind. Or maybe she has folded me away completely, a chapter she's chosen not to reopen. I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. As for me, I'm still learning how to breathe without her, still teaching myself how to fill the silence with something other than memories. Some days I succeed, other days I don't. But here's what I do know. Love is never simple. It's never clean. It's messy and brutal, and sometimes it tears you apart in ways you never thought possible. She was my greatest love and my deepest wound, both at once. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see her walking away, carrying with her not just her own heart, but mine as well. Maybe one day I'll find someone else. Someone who can give me the truth without the lies, the love without the betrayal. But until then, I live with the memory of her, the woman who taught me that even the most beautiful love can hide the darkest secret. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the world is quiet, I whisper her name, not out of anger, but out of the simple, stubborn ache of a man who once loved a woman too deeply to ever fully let her go.